everyone, my name is Josh and welcome to WHIMS. And today I'm going to give you a new segment called TMAS or TMAS, which is Tell Me a Story. And this particular segment is going to be focusing on how I craft stories and what actually inspires me, what keeps me motivated, and I'll tell you a little bit about my background in regards to how I'm connected with storytelling, how I became very fascinated with storytelling, and it's just basically going to give you a few little tidbits of ideas, things that keep me, wanting to keep writing, keep telling stories, things that all different sorts of methods that you can use to get yourself started. If you're interested in writing and you want to tell your own stories, this is how you could potentially get started. So a little bit of background first. So back when I was a child, I used to, more often than not, I used to enjoy, for the most part, spending a lot of time in my own imagination. I liked going on all these different adventures. I basically created a place where I was mostly alone in the house, where it was a very small space, and I would often, even if I was on somewhere like a carpet in the living room, I would always find a place anywhere, whether it be at school or whether it be at home, to basically go inside my own head and use my imagination on a lot of things, because I did used to have a lot of toys, and sometimes I would use the toys to basically create characters, but for the most part I did often rely on my own imagination, and I had little props and everything like that to help me get into the story. And where it all started was I just basically had myself, just going around pretending as if I was talking to people, talking to my toys, getting conversations out of my toys. But then it would often go deeper into me actually creating characters, entire worlds, and various different storylines that my friends later on when I was at school would interact with and play off of, and we could basically build a story through that. But then as I got older and things started to get on top, and it was more about, education and knuckling down, doing work, I thought, well, how can I basically adapt this idea into a story, and how can I adapt this form of play into something that I could actually use to my advantage. And that kind of all changed when I found out about Harry Potter and the author J.K. Rowling. And J.K. Rowling is, of course, the pen name of J.K. Rowling, who is this author. She basically came out with the Harry Potter books, and they said to her when she first started writing these books, these are books that will appeal to boys, and that it will pretty much please them to know that it wouldn't sell as well if a woman had written it. So they decided, well, can we use your initials? And she only had the name Jo, and then she used her middle name Kathleen to essentially give it the K, so it's J.K. Rowling. And that pretty much is where it all started, because my parents pretty much said, oh, the author of Harry Potter is a woman, Josh. And I went, okay, who's an author? What's an author? And my mum and dad had to explain to me that, oh, it's someone who actually writes books. Books just don't come out of the ground. They actually, are written by people. And I actually thought, oh, there's something to this, and I can actually, turn this into, something. And it was one of those things where I did actually find myself going, okay, let's write a book, or let's write something. And since then, I have been basically creating my own stories, creating my own characters, creating worlds, and all these other sorts of things. But where do we start? Well, for me, just write little stories. Write stories that are shaped by the people around you. Write stories about your family members if they've got interesting stories or have interesting backgrounds and ideas or various interesting insights into the world. Write them down. Engage in a conversation with them. Have a cup of tea. Engage in a conversation with them, and just get those stories out there and maybe write them down. And then if you have enough material for a story, start to take off the skin of your family member and maybe create character around that, and say, who is this character, what's their background like, who are they? And you can create a story around that, like the histories or whatever it happens to be, like family history or anything like that, or cultural background, anything that you can think of, write it all down. That's one method. Or you can just go to your friends, and you can basically talk about a conversation. You can write a conversation down, and that can be a scene in your story. There's all sorts of different methods. Or you can do what I do sometimes. I just basically ask the question, what if? And that's something that I really did kind of find out when I was writing various other different short stories. Like, I came up with the idea for Prologue, which was a short story that I shared for Reader's Corner while I was working on my GCSE English exam. And my English teacher basically said to me, write an autobiographical piece. But because most of my classmates know a lot about me, and I did share a lot of stories about my family and my past, I thought, try something different. And I decided to write the prologue. And I wrote that when I was 16, and I wrote it pretty much because I wanted to write a story that was from the point of view of someone being born, and not just someone being born, but there had to be something else to it. So one night when my parents were at home, we basically were just talking about stuff, and they entertained the idea that I might have been a twin. And this clearly wasn't true. This was just something that they just speculated on at first. And I basically took that very small idea and I said, okay, this is a light bulb moment happening here. And as soon as that happened, it was like click. And immediately I went off and wrote it all down. And then the very next day, I just put it on my teacher's desk and she said, this was amazing. Would you like to read it in class? And that's one of the things that actually gets it all started, is sometimes it can just be something, a very insignificant, very small thing, and then it can just build, and it can just build and build and build until you start to create all these different ideas. So that's one way of doing it. That's one way of keeping inspired, and that's one way of keeping your storytelling going. Other times you can just look at other things in life. Like, say, for example, I like writing, or I like keeping a notebook with me whenever I go out, and I like to, craft a story around it. Like, for one instance, I actually wrote a story about my first date officially, and I remember I actually wrote down all the details, what the atmosphere of the place was like, who the people were, and what we were actually saying to each other, me and this person who I went on a date with, and that actually became a story. So that's another example where I can just take from life and actually just shape it into a narrative. And there's so many other examples of that. Like, say, for example, when I wrote the short story Weather Beast, I essentially was off with the flu. And while I was off with the flu, I actually saw because my bed is against a wall, and as I'm looking up, like if I was looking up from my bed, like sitting up in my bed, my bathroom is right across from me when I'm looking up and sitting up. So I put a lot of coats on on the door to my bathroom, and one evening, one of the coats actually did look like the shroud of a cloak or like a hooded figure, and it actually felt really, frightening, because it looked like almost like the figure of death was coming, and that really terrified me. So I basically took that idea and essentially shaped it into the story, and that became the twist of Weather Beast. And I actually found myself going, that's actually really good. But then I did it mostly while I was sick with the flu, so I didn't have the energy to get up and actually write it. So I actually just wrote it all in my head. And then when I eventually just sat down to write it, I essentially just put pen to paper, and that was it. And that's what I do. I often get little bits and pieces here and there. Like, it can be a conversation between your friends. It can be a conversation between family members, sharing their stories, sharing their histories. It could be whatever you want it to be. But you just have to really kind of keep at it. And remember that you really do have to really kind of stick with it. You can't just simply say that, oh yeah, this is the fun thing to do, and then just stop. If you feel like something isn't perfect or something isn't working, your voice will tell you and your head will tell you this isn't working, this doesn't sound right. So you have to keep working on that. And if you want to keep, going further in stories, just try to imagine what you like to read, or what you like to see in your own TV shows. That's what I used to do when I was first using my imagination as a child. I used to love TV shows like Batman the Animated Series, a show called Shaolin Showdown, or the classic Indigo Pokemon series that used to be on. I used to watch all of those, and I used to really enjoy those characters and those worlds and the storytelling as well. I used to really love the storytelling of a lot of those shows. And I used to get inspired to write characters based on the characters that I saw on those shows. Like, I had all sorts of different characters that I used to really enjoy spending time with when I was outside with my friends playing these games. We used to have all these different adventures with twists and turns. And then when the bell went, that'll be the end of the story for now, and it'd be like a to be continued. So I really kind of, learnt the craft of storytelling through those imaginary games and how to build stories. So that's another way in which you can, be influenced by the stories. Read and watch as many other content that really inspires you a lot, and really just kind of get a lot out of it. And just try to use all sorts of different things. Another method that I like to use is basically taking a scene from a bad film or a bad book and basically reworking it so that it's actually a little bit more, it's a little bit more linear, but that could also be considered fan fictioning or plagiarism. So I'm not really going to go do that. That's actually kind of dangerous. But personally, I think that this particular element is very tough to do because it really is just depending on time and place and what you're thinking about when you are writing those things down, because it all just depends on all these different things. Like, I'm going to use an example that isn't from my own personal library, but in the TV series Inside Number 9, Steve Pemberton and Reece Shearsmith came up with the idea for the episode The Bill, on the idea of they were basically at a restaurant and they overheard a conversation of these three people arguing over the bill, and it wasn't simply how much people should pay or I don't want to pay this, you guys should pay it. It was more about who should pay it, and they essentially took that idea and really fleshed it out so that the comedy came from how exaggerated can we make this, how can we dramatize it. And that's basically how inspiration is. You take little bits and pieces from real life, and that's how you craft a story. Well, now I'm actually going to leave this particular video off with a hook line for your short story. So we're going to work on a short story, and I'm going to leave you with this hook line for all you creatives out there to get to work on your own short story. I'm going to leave you with the hook line of, the last man on earth is found sitting alone in his room when all of a sudden he hears a knock at the door. That's your hook line for your short story, and I want you to make anything you want out of it, and let me know your results in the comments, and maybe send me a few links to your short stories and I'll give them a read, and then we can actually just talk about it in the next video. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's a little different from what I usually do. But for the most part, I really do want to know what you guys think of this video and if it actually has encouraged you to be more creative. And I hope to do more videos on this series, Tell Me a Story, because I really do think it's time to do something different and really show how creativity works and what you can actually do with it and how I've gotten the most out of it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope you guys are having a really good day. This has been Josh with WHIMS, Tell Me a Story, or Timas. And I hope you're all doing very well. Take care. Bye for now.